Good morning, everyone. I'm Ira Pilchin, and I'm a member of Fourth Presbyterian Churches in Chicago. And I want to say in Chicago because we've had people join us from out of town and even out of the country. So we're going international with these classes. We're with Fourth Presbyterian Church's Adult Education Committee. We are the volunteers who help organize and evaluate and plan with other committees throughout the church, classes that we offer on Sunday mornings and other times throughout the week as well, including the Michigan Avenue Forum, which this year will be in January. We will do that remotely as well. This is the third class offering for women in judges taught by Steed Davidson. Steed is a PhD and Dean of the Faculty and Vice President of Academic Affairs at McCormick Theological Seminary, and he's a professor of Hebrew Bible and the Old Testament. He's actually written quite a few interesting works and is involved in many different academic pursuits. He's the author of Empire and Exile, Postcolonial Readings of Selected Texts of the Book of Jeremiah. And I won't go into his full biography here, but he's taught for us before, and we're so glad to have him again. And Dr. Davidson is also a native of Trinidad and Tobago, which is an area of the world that I don't think about all that often, and it's always interesting to think about those things from time to time. Anyway, just a few housekeeping matters. Again, this is the third of 5 classes on women in judges. The previous courses are being recorded, and this one is being recorded and are being posted to Fourth Church's website. I will put the link in the chat for that. It's basically the adult ed offerings that the church are called the Academy for Faith and Life. So if you need to navigate that, just go to fourthchurch.org, and then on the left nav, you'll see Academy for Faith and Life, and the recordings are posted in the course description for women in judges. Don't forget, next Sunday, we go back to standard time. So the good news is that we'll get an extra hour of sleep, and also if you miss out on the time change, you'll just be an hour early. You won't miss out and be late. But again, a reminder for that. We're also joined this morning by my colleague on the Adult Ed Committee, Allison Thomas, who before we start our presentation by Dr. Davidson, will lead us in prayer. One more thing I forgot to mention, we found that it's easiest to manage class discussion if you have a comment or question that can wait a little bit. We ask that you at least attempt to put your comment in the chat section, and then when Dr. Davidson is ready to take questions, which should be about 15 or 20 minutes into his presentation, we can go off of that first. If you're not able to articulate that, we can always accommodate people who want to hop in as well. Just make sure that you unmute yourself and also keep yourself muted if you have other dogs or whatever else is going on in the background. So Allison, if you can lead us in prayer this morning, we greatly appreciate it. And thanks again for everyone for joining us this morning.
Okay, join me in prayer. Good and gracious God, we thank you for this day and for all our days. Today on Reformation Sunday, we're grateful for the founders of our Protestant tradition, who, inspired by your Spirit, set about reforming your church. Be with us as we continue in that work, seeking to be continually reformed according to your word. As part of that process, we're glad for the opportunity to gather today in study and conversation, to explore anew and better understand the women and men whose stories comprise your story, your word to us. Open our minds and hearts as we learn together and continue our faith journey. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Allison. And now Dr. Davidson.
Well, good morning to everyone. I am delighted we are back here today and that everything is working well today. We're on time. We're all in the right place, hopefully, I think. And let's go. So let me start sharing the screen for the presentation. Here it is. So today we are looking at two women. If you were able to read in preparation for this, then you would have you would have been able to get to read the story of, basically it's the story of Samson, but we're focusing on two women in his life, his mother and Delilah. There are a number of other women that come up in the Samson story, but these are the two particular ones. And you probably know more popularly the Delilah portion of the story rather than his mother's story. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about Samson's mother and how she features in. So one of the things we don't pay attention to are the circumstances, all of the circumstances of the birth of Samson, because we know about the other part related to the vow. But Samson's mother comes to popularity in some sense because she's this infertile woman. And anytime you get a notice in the Bible about a woman who is infertile, you have to watch out because something is going to happen and very predictable things happen. She's going to become pregnant. The pregnancy is going to happen under unusual circumstances, and she's going to give birth to a boy. And that boy is going to become a man who becomes quite significant. That's the predictable outcome. For some reason or the other, girls seem not to be conceived under these unusual circumstances. It's only boys. And if it's a boy that's being conceived, his life is going to be significant. So this is reserved for a select group, and you know we'll call it like a type scene if you wish. And this particular story shares many resonances with these stories across the Bible, but also across several cultures in antiquity. Samson's mother is greeted by this, it's a divine messenger. But one of the things that we will see a lot happens in particular in the Hebrew Bible is that these divine messengers turn up as ordinary human beings. This is the case with the man who visits Abraham and Sarah, and also several other kind of what we will call theophanies, where it's somebody in human form. So forget the images that you see of angels with wings and all of that. That never happens in the Bible. Those are much later imaginings of what divine messengers look like. And I'm using the term divine messengers just to get us away from the conception of angels. And messenger is much more appropriate because that's also one of the dominant meaning of the term, the word that's being used. So here's somebody who's coming to communicate. And in this case is announcing the birth of this child. Now, one of the things that you will notice when you read the story and the way in which the messenger communicates to her is what's not there. It's this promise that she will give birth, she will conceive and give birth to a child. Let's see if we could read it more particularly. It's what's not there. It is you have been unable to become pregnant and haven't given birth. You are now pregnant and will give birth to a son. That translation might be a little bit more extra pleading than I would like. What many scholars have pointed out is the fact that that there is no man involved here, right? No human being involved in the conception. There is no indication that she went away and she had sex with her husband. And the idea being that then Samson is conceived under these unusual circumstances, are quite fairly common to the ancient world, where women are impregnated by divine beings. So there is this idea that the conception is also a unique type of conception, and the child that's being born. Okay, I took you away from the from what I was showing you. All right, I was looking through my Hebrew for something else. Okay, right. So that piece, because I'm reading another translation and I'm like, you are pregnant, and then the Hebrew that I've always worked with says you will become pregnant, which means that it happens subsequent to the meeting. But subsequent to the meeting, we don't have the detail that she and her husband had sex, raising the question that he is not necessarily he didn't father the child. Okay, so very common, not unusual for women to have stories of women who are impregnated by deities. Happens across several cultures, and of course, this is what we get when we reach the stage of the story of Mary. But here's this other important thing that happens during for Samson's conception. His mother is told, here's stuff that you need to do once this child, during your pregnancy. It's essentially to undertake what has been called this NAZARITE vow. And we see details of it in Numbers chapter 6. And so you could look it up there if you want to get those details as to what's involved. There's some other later extra biblical material that speak to the NAZARITE vow. But essentially it is no alcohol, nothing that's unclean, and when the boy is born, no razor on his head, no contact with the dead. These are some of those details that you'll find in Numbers. They are not all specifically referenced in that early conversation that she has, right? Especially the part about the dead is not there. But later on in the passage, that's assumed when he kills the animal and takes the honey from the carcass and that sort of a thing. You see how the narrator of chapter 13 frowns upon the actions, chapter 14 rather, frowns upon Samson's actions. Now, the thing to note is that the Nazarite vow, as we see it in Numbers and we see it in other writings, is for a limited duration. That this is something someone undertakes for a period, and sometimes for about a month or a month or two. What we have happening here is that Samson's mother makes the vow for him a lifetime vow. So pay attention to what the divine messenger says to her in the early part of chapter 13, right, verse 5, and the difference in how she reports it to her husband, Manoah. Now, the intriguing thing about Samson's mother is that she is never named. We have access to her husband's name, Manoah. But when you read chapter 13, she is really the active character. She's the one doing most of the work. She is, in fact, is the one who is making things up. And by making things up, I'm saying she's not being deceptive, but she is in some ways taking charge of what's happening. So like I said, in reporting and telling her husband, she then says, no, he's going to be a Nazarite until he dies, from birth until death. And that's unusual. But this is the claim that she makes for the boy, which is not contradicted in the telling and in the life of Samson. Things that get glossed over is the fact that this woman received the divine revelation. Over and again, the divine messenger comes to her and not her husband. So when she reports to him, her husband, what took place, and he tries to become involved, and he prays and says, look, please send this person back to me. And of course, God hears. But what happens is the divine messenger returns, but not to him. The divine messenger finds her when she's alone and speaks to her. Now you could see him constantly trying to insert himself into the events. And he does so in a very awkward and clumsy way because he doesn't understand divine things. He doesn't, so even when he kind of gets the picture, he still is wrong. So he's like, oh, wow, we've come close to God. We're going to die. And she has to say to him, look, please don't worry. We're not going to die. I've been down this road before. I've been face to face with this 2 or 3 times already. And look, I'm still here. So it's it's important contrast that you're seeing of the man who is incapable of accessing and understanding all the questions of divinity and dealing with the other world. But his wife is comfortable, is in control, and this is where, say, in some ways pushing the boundaries of what's allowed in that relationship by saying, no, my son is not just going to be a Nazarite when he's born, but he's going to be so for the rest of his life. And she gives him the name, which is again very unusual when you have a sort of a fairly active father involved. It's the father who names the son, and she gives him the name that with a celestial stuff in it. His name Samson has stuff is related to the sun as well. So his mother is an intriguing study. Because again, it certainly gets fairly overlooked how involved she is. Now, the other place where we will see her being very involved, which is perhaps arguable, is in the sort of parenting decisions or involvement. As Samson is growing, or at least comes to some adulthood, we see this reliance upon both of his parents, where there's this involvement of both of his parents. So Samson's story is in some ways made by women. So if in chapter 13, it's the birth story with his involvement with the woman, then we get to chapter 14, is this failed attempt to get married. And marrying in some ways outside of his community, something that both of his parents had anxieties about. Now, we need to recall that the annunciation that Samson's mother received was that Samson would be this deliverer of his people against the Philistines. And this doesn't seem to be the major focus of Samson's life. So when we finally hear from Samson as a functioning adult in the start of chapter 14, it is about his attraction to a Philistine woman. It's not about anything to do with the military. It's not about it. Now, we are told in chapter 14 that his attraction to this woman is part of the divine plan. This is how God was using him to sort of destabilize the Philistines. Okay, so we could accept that, except when we start to see Samson's behavior, it throws all of that out to the door. Anyway, So Samson, just to narrate for you from verse 1 to 12, the involvement of his mother, where for us it might seem obvious. Well, of course, both father and mother are involved in these critical parts of his life. This is not always the case in the Bible. It's always the father, and the father singularly, even when we know that there is a mother. I mean, we did this thing last week where we looked at Jephthah, who makes this decision about sacrificing his daughter, and there's no mention of the mother, none whatsoever. So you would think that a decision about the death of a child would involve both parents, but here this is not. This doesn't have the same level of consequence. But we see the mother involved. So Samson, he goes back and he talks to the mother and the father about his attraction to the Philistine woman. Both father and mother are basically advising him, look, why don't you just find some girl in this community? Why are you going to these? And this is one of the classic phrases we will see in the Bible. We see it in Judges, we see it in Kings, and so on. This term where Philistines are called uncircumcised. And it is a valued judgment, of course, that you have to hear. They're not like us. They are different. And but we won't get there. And then both mother and father in verse 4, they go to visit. Both of them are traveling to this Philistine village to negotiate the marriage with the girl's father. And then we have this detour where he goes and he kills the animal and he gets the honey and so on, and he feeds both of them the honey from it. But then Samson, and when we get to verse 10, Samson and his father are alone, and not the mother is not involved. And this is like a kind of a bachelor party that Samson is having, and that's where everything goes awry from that bachelor party, where he's drinking and doing all sorts of things. The mother is not there, and that's the last we hear of the mother, that she is now out of the picture at this point in time. And this is this critical place where Samson gets undone. Because the marriage really doesn't take place. There's an argument as to and a debate whether he actually gets married. I don't think it happens. I think the sort of a betrothal processes dismantle the entire thing. He abandons the woman, and I think I have a slide. My next slide is on that. He abandons the woman, and the father, the father kind of gives her away to a thing. So here's this woman who is exchanged in marriage, and it previews what we will see much later on, where she is threatened or coerced to kind of subdue Samson, and then she engages in some kind of emotional manipulation. Samson leaves her, goes back home, then comes back and says, "Hey, I need my woman," and the father said, "Oh no, I gave her to someone else. So do you want her sister?" I mean, and this is something we see in other parts of the Bible. This is how Laban treats Jacob when he was attracted to Leah, but then kind of deceives him and gives him that. So again, not a very unusual thing. Okay, I want to go very quickly to Delilah, which is the chapter 16. Okay, so again, three chapters, and each of them there is an episode with a different woman. Chapter 16, there are two women. There is this brief interlude with the sex worker that he has, but we won't spend any time with that. But when we get to Delilah in chapter 16, Delilah is an intriguing figure, because if Samson's mother is never named and is just only referred to in some ways as a derivative of her husband, Delilah is independent. We are basically introduced to her as someone who lives in the same community where Samson grows up, right? The Sorek Valley. So presumably she may very well be one of their own. She's not She's not Philistine. And all we're told is that her name was Delilah. We're not told, like usual, she is the daughter of, she is the wife of, she is the mother of. She was just Delilah. No father, no husband. We don't really know whether where she comes from. We know where she lives. But two things are important about Delilah. One, Samson is in love with her. This is an important piece because this we don't see happening in the previous chapter with the woman we must say perhaps is infatuated with. He sees her, he's attracted to her, he wants her, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of a strong emotional attachment to her. But in the case of Delilah, this definitely is the case. So that's one thing. And we don't know whether she returns the love to him in the same way. But the other piece is that Delilah is an enterprising woman because she is approached by the lords of the Philistine and basically says, look, each of us will give you 11,000 pieces of silver if you do this for us. And the fact is that she doesn't turn them down. We don't know what it is. Some people guess we're talking about 55,000 pieces of silver. The Philistine cities were comprised of 5 major cities. So presumably there were 5 of them talking to her. So she's getting close to 55,000. The amount doesn't matter. But what's important to note is that she's functioning in a way that we don't normally see women function in the Bible, and that aren't allowed to function. So she's paid. And what we have is this playful interlude between Samson and Delilah, where we're back and forth. She manipulates him, he deceives her. And it's this game of bondage where in every single, so the physicality is something that we can't get away from, because most of the depictions that you have of Samson and Delilah is that of with these very heavily sexual overtones to it. And I think in many ways rightly so, because you could see from chapter 15, Samson appears to be someone who is driven by libido, whether that's sexual or just some kind of a physical aggression. All of that is tied up in there. And the way in which in every single instance he is being bound with some measure of pain, I think has some sense of what's going on. Now, Samson, of course, is not unaware of what's happening. He knows that this is going on, and he plays along, and she's doing it. And part of what Delilah does, and you could see in the episode, is how it builds, where she is manipulating him. At the ultimate time, you will see her raising and playing upon the important piece in verse 15, where she says, how can you say, I love you, when you don't trust me? And this we know is part of Samson's downfall in that relationship, because he is intensely devoted to her, he's attracted to her. So let me just close this off by saying, I think that there's some ways in which Delilah is a composite of several of the women we have met before in the book of Judges. She has the same level of sort of independent and authoritative bearing as Deborah, who is guiding and taking charge of military strategy. She will have some of the pieces of the seductress nature of Jael. Certainly the place where Samson, we're told, she kind of she feeds him and he falls asleep on her lap. That certainly has echoes of Jael. She is the take charge, overpowering woman with the millstone, who drops the millstone to kill Abimelech. Ultimately, Samson ends up grinding at a millstone. She's focused like Asa, who we met in chapter 1, who says to her father, look, this land isn't good, so give me this one. And like Jephthah's daughter, she doesn't seem to be driven by some sense of futurity. That is, well, let me get married, have children, living a picket fence. That doesn't seem to be what's driving her. What's driving her is making her way in a world peopled by men and seeing how best she could manipulate, whether it is to take the money from the Philistine lords, deal with Samson, something to make sense of her life. So let's talk about, these are the topics I've put out here for conversation. And what we have are these two different depictions of women, the mother and Delilah. Which one speaks to you? The mother on the one hand, given to the functions of being a mother, but Delilah on the other hand, we don't see that's definitely there in her. And then, in some ways, we see both of these women subverting the patriarchal order. Is it done by the direct access to where the power is, which is what the mother has, and she's able to manipulate it and take charge and at least fulfill the social function of being a mother? Or do you do it by the subtle means of seduction and womanly wiles, as we see Delilah will do? And what does this mean for our thinking about women who break the rules and women who use unconventional means to manipulate their way in a world that is designed not for their flourishing? Because this is certainly something that women will have to, we'll talk about a great deal. And we see this happening to women in various forms, and particularly women who are disempowered. This perception that if you do this like everyone else, you will get by, has proven to be a myth more than anything else, because the systems don't necessarily design for your success. And in order to make your way, you just have to do it differently and take it on. So that's it. Let me stay there for a while. And if you have questions, clarifications, raise those, pose those concerns, or open it up. So Ira or Allison, I don't know who I'm going to throw it back to.
Yeah, I don't, nothing in the chat so far. If anyone would like to just hop in, I guess it'll just be like we're all in person, and if you speak over each other, one will just kind of defer to the other. So why don't we try that? Those of you on the phone as well, feel free to hop in. Well, we have a question in chat from Jessica. Why do you think Samson didn't try to marry Delilah?
Yes, that's an intriguing one. He tries to get married to the Philistine woman, but there is none, and emotionally he's much more attached to her. I think in part we have to pay attention to the fact that there is no father in Delilah's life, at least in the way that the story is told, so that his access to the Philistine woman has to be through the father. And that can only happen through marriage. Whereas Delilah is in some ways free. So marriage is off the table. It's not a concern. There's no man negotiating it. So that because however else you might want to think of the sweet and romantic aspects of marriage, in this particular cultural context, marriage essentially is a negotiation and an arrangement between men. And in order to exchange and move women around. So for Delilah, if there is no father who controls her, then there's no need to get married. And so they could then pursue the relationship without that. Now, which says to me that what we have is a dangerous combination of a man who is emotionally invested with a woman who is not as emotionally invested.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I'm Suzanne. I'm intrigued by the fact that the women in these stories who act do so kind of as hackers, hacking into the code, like Delilah hacks into Samson's secret. And then this is the only way they can get power. And it sort of reflects the theme throughout the Bible. Whenever the Hebrews are the underdog, they have to be clever. And they're exceedingly clever in argument, in action, in tricking the enemy. And women are kind of representing then the whole group. But they always seem to hack on behalf of their group, whether there is a group within the Hebrews or against enemies of the Hebrews. And do you see that pattern, or?
Yeah, thank you, Susan. I like this idea of hacking into the system. That is quite appealing, and I think it's certainly effective. You know, there are these stories, much more of them than we actually want to pay attention to in the way in which the thing is told, of the kind of an underdog story of someone who you just have to scrape your way, and by doing it you have to trick your way into it, and it's pure self-interest in many places, and it is purely about survival in others. So that the tactics sometimes don't seem pretty, and aren't always commendable. So I would agree that, particularly when you look at, say, stories that we're looking at here in Judges, Genesis has a number of them as well, that what we're getting is a picture of a scrappy people who have to make their way. And if you get that image in your head, I think you're much closer to the reality, and also getting a more subversive view of the Bible, rather than this group was always powerful. This group could do anything and just bulldoze its way because it comes authorized by God. Those are images that we have that are very dangerous, because it is a kind of a might is right type of a mentality, without seeing how little people, disempowered people, constantly have to struggle, and seeing that that's the side that God is on with those little people who are trying to make their way. Yeah, sometimes they do it for, like I said, it's pure self-interest, and it doesn't necessarily help some other group who may not be aligned with them. But thank you for that image, Susan.
Sylvia, or whoever is writing on Sylvia's account, had a question, comment. Did you want to share that with the group if you unmute? Or
I'm almost finished. I'm almost finished writing it here. But I thought Sylvia was asking, what is the sin that's being committed, the evil in the sight of the Lord? And I came across something really interesting. In one case, it was the sin of overworking the soil and not letting the land lie fallow on the seventh year, not giving it a Sabbath. But mostly it's just in the prophets, it's just, there you go again, just like the heathen, just like the pagans, committing human sacrifice, committing murder on your own children. I mean, that's just the overriding theme I'm coming to see. Like even Jesus said, quoted Hosea saying, this human sacrifice is just murder. It's ridiculous. God doesn't want that. So I don't know if I'm answering her question or not.
I was really struck this weekend. The phrase just played over and over, and the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. I noticed that the phrase also begins chapter 4 and chapter 6. And I know this is one of the purposes of the story, and it's what humans and institutions do. but I wondered if the translations change at all from that beginning of 4th chapter to the 6th chapter, the 13th chapter. In my head, I heard, and they did it again. So did they express any frustration, or are they just telling us this story without that kind of, with that matter-of-fact approach?
Yeah, what you're seeing is actually, I know how you're reading it. You're correct on it. That phrase gets repeated fairly often up until chapter 13. So you'll see it many times. But you're correct. The what the it is not very specific. And that leads a lot of people to go with very simplistic notions. I think one has to think about it in a holistic way. That is, the people abandoned God, and by abandoned God, it could very well be some of the things I was hearing about. Look, yeah, you misused the land. You mistreated your workers. You engaged, so all of the kinds of things of communal solidarity that we could see as being expressed were abandoned. That you started following systems and systems and gods that got you thinking about other things rather than stuff that will build the community. So if God was the sort of central thing, and God was the uniting figure for this community, and God then determines this is how we live in community, and you go after another God, you're breaching that. So that, I would encourage us to think about it in those very deeper ways, that it means a whole lot more of it. But the book never tells us what the it is. But as we're seeing, what happens is that it fragments the community, and then there is need to bring things back, to bring things back on track. It does get to the point where even the narrator of the book is frustrated by saying, "There you go again," and stop saying it. So we don't see it in the after chapter, a whole lot after chapter 13.
Annette, you had a comment in the chat. Did you want to share that and expound upon that? You unmute.
Yes. Last time we talked about the non-literal meaning of the Bible and understanding the stories and how they are today. So that's one part of my question. So help me out here. It doesn't pay to go with a tainted woman. That is, I'm just joking. Give me a sense of the bigger story for today, okay? Please.
I don't. When you say, because you laughingly dismissed it, because I'm more intrigued now about the tainted woman bit that you had in mind.
Obviously, Delilah is not mainstream, and she's not going to get married, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And that isn't the real issue for me. The real issue for me is, how does it apply today?
I think precisely why that's one of the points that I'm making. How do you think about women who, in some ways, deliberately, intentionally, not just accidentally, basically say, "Look, this is the kind of life I would lead. It doesn't involve children. It doesn't involve family. It doesn't involve husband. It involves me relentlessly seeking for benefits for myself." Women like those tend, up to today, as much as we would like to think about it, women like those tend to be frowned upon. So I think those are the places that I'm trying to open up and to explore a little bit,
Okay,
because we
so,
see this.
I'm sorry. So if we take this and we apply it to women who love their work has to come first. Now, some people always think of that as artists, but not necessarily. That is their main reason to be. And even today, I would say that's not boldly embraced. And they're always asked a lot of questions like, well, don't you like children? Well, don't you like men? Well, don't you like babies? You know, so there still is a stigma to that today.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it is you're on track with the questions. It's the 30-something-year-old woman who is asked, so when are you going to get married? Or she probably is involved in a relationship. When are you guys going to get married? Because it still is the expectation that a woman fulfills her life through childbearing, through marriage and childbearing, and let's talk about it within the context of, well, this awfully oppressive idea that women can have it all. That you could be mother, you could be wife, you could be homemaker, you could be professional woman, you could be all of this, all of that, all of that. And I'm saying it's oppressive. It's oppressive both to the women who take it on. And it is also oppressive in the fact that the only way that a woman does that successfully and doesn't exhaust herself in the process is through other women performing functions. So that the admiration that you have, people saying, oh, wow, look at this wonderful judge who has 5 children. But what's invisible is all of the childcare that's being performed by lower paid women. All of the household work that's being performed. Because in many instances, the have-it-all notion that's being communicated to middle and upper class women, and that, I mean, other women are in some ways encouraged to aspire to, render the women who are performing the domestic tasks invisible. So that's the piece that I would say, you know, let's think about it as being, in some ways, an oppressive set of ideas. Now, of course, somebody wants to do it and can do it well, fine. But what you're subscribing to is that there is this singular path, and you must fulfill that path. And good for you if you could tack some other things onto it in the process. But make sure those children are birthed. Make sure that you have that ring on it. You know, all of these interesting set of values, and someone like a Delilah becomes anathema. And so it's no wonder when you look in the popular culture, the way in which Delilah is imaged. It's in many ways the downside of the acceptable woman. There are some people, there's some areas where Delilah is admired, and these are the countercultural spaces that recuperate Delilah in a heroic form. But in many instances, Delilah is not a commendable figure. Is there any wonder that Delilah, among all of the women in the Bible who become saints, Delilah is not one of them? Is that surprising? Because Delilah is counter to the image of domesticity that the church wishes to convey.
Dr. Davidson, I had a kind of a comment based on, and I guess question as well. This is something I'm reading from the Hebrew Bible translation from Robert Alter, and his comment about going back to the beginning of the reading for today. He writes, the Annunciation type scene is fundamentally matriarchal, the revelations being vouchsafed to the future mother. But here we are given a virtually satiric version of the Annunciation, highlighting male obtuseness and the good sense of the woman. This scene thus becomes a perfect prelude to the story of a brawny male hero whose lapses of judgment in regard to women entangle him in repeated difficulties and ultimately destroy him. Do you think that that's a fair encapsulation of the reading for today, or would you add anything to that? Or
Yep. No, that's it. The thing I would add is this way within which Samson's mother exposes the foibles of her husband. And when you look at her, what you're seeing with him standing next to her is not a very self-contained man. It's not a man who is intelligent and who understands all of the things. And so it in some ways blows up the idea of the male head of household thing as someone who's in control. She exposes that. And then, of course, which is something I'm still trying to work through. On the other hand, is when you put Samson as her son next to her, it's again, it's another form of masculinity that is being undone, because Samson's machismo and aggressiveness and sexual prowess, etc., again, is also weak in relation to what his mother is doing, right? Because his mother gets the thing about his divine mission, and Samson never completes it, or even attempts to pursue it, and then ultimately becomes this very, very tragic figure.
well, do you think whoever wrote this meant this as a lesson about the limits of male power and brawniness? Or because I think a lot of people see this story as an example of the treachery of femme fatales. But if you look at it from the other way, it's like, look at this idiotic guy who keeps getting in trouble because he's, it's almost like if you hear the term nasty woman, you say, yeah, she's kind of nasty, or do you say, no, you're an idiot because you're using a term like that and it's your problem that you can't deal with it, not her problem?
Well, the thing is, I think many of our early interpretations of these biblical texts were set within a very masculinist frame. So it was, let's be sympathetic to the man. So you could look, and because I can't remember how old I was, but there was, and I think my first sort of encounter with this story was not through reading it in the Bible, was a television episode. There was a thing called Greatest Heroes of the Bible or something like that, and it was telling the story of Samson and seeing that, and it's what people today called empathy. There's a lot of sympathetic portrayal of Samson, and this is what happened. It's about the plight of the male hero more than anything else, so that Samson becomes a victim. And Delilah, of course, is the aggressor. That's the way in which we have been socialized for quite a long time, thinking about it. And you flip it. Why? Because it was always read from the perspective of male values. And if you relax the male values a bit, then you start to see, oh, your question, Ira, is the question that people have been struggling with the entire book of Judges. So not only in this regard, but when we go back to all of the other men, and we'll look forward as well to the other men, you look at it's the question of Jephthah. Is he the hero here, or is he on the other side? You go, you're back to Barak and Sisera. What some scholars have called the unmanning of the men in the book. That a lot of the normative masculine values and virtues don't seem to hold or hold very well within this book. It led some people to ask, could a man really put this book together with these stories? Because it is not that favorable to men. So people were saying, maybe it's a woman who is responsible for this book. You know, we have not been able to prove that to be the case. I don't think it is, because there are times when somebody who can break with the considered opinion. So it's possible that a man could channel that, but it does raise, when we read stories like these, is it the idea for us to see, wow, the emperors really have no clothes?
Could you tell me a little bit more about which parties Samson and Delilah represent? I mean, I get the feeling they're both Hebrew, but they're sort of different political parties. And Samson's wins out in the end. I mean, he kills them all. So it would clear things up to know if she is she, is she rooting for her people here? Is that the point?
It's so we really don't know ethnically where Delilah is situated. So that's hard. I mean, and the reality is, if she was say, Hebrew, she seems willing to go against her own people. So that part is very clear. The thing though is, Samson never really becomes the bigger an important, I don't want to say national character, but for the sake of it, in that, taking Samson out is not weakening the Israelites, because Samson is not leading any army. Samson is self-interest on steroids. so that he isn't really working in the national interest.
Is he a vigilante? Was he a vigilante?
I won't even call him vigilante. Jephthah is vigilante. He's not even vigilante. He's just self-indulgent. Self-indulgent. So he fails to rise to the level of a party leader, if you wish, Suzanne. He fails to rise to the level where his life has big, broad implications. And so what he does is, when the victory that you're pointing to at the end of chapter 16, it's localized. It's not neutralizing the entire Philistines. He destroys a temple in a local area and kills all the Philistines who are in it. But the bigger threat of the Philistines remains for a while and not solved, because here is somebody who is given the task to do this thing in the big, broad interest, and could never get beyond himself and his own desires and preferences, and he is undone by someone equally, Delilah, who perhaps is thinking along the same way. So that's probably why they have that type of a connection, that she herself isn't thinking in terms of broad community service. That's not what's driving her.
So then, is his victory just a personal victory over
people
he's mad at? Like, say a president loses an election and has a pissy fit and puts his finger on the nuclear button.
not as extreme as that, because it's him trying to recover his honor now in death. So rather than dying dishonorably, right, he dies on his own terms, and he takes people out with him. And that's kind of like a heroic death. But it's not the major inroads into dismantling the Philistines as a major threat.
So it links up with that earlier story where this man is killed by a woman and he's dying, and he tells this man, "Kill me with your sword so I won't have been killed by a woman."
Yes, it's the same. It's the
Oh,
same.
God.
Yep, that issue of thing.
Well, we're getting to the end of the hour here. I hate to cut this short, but although I guess if anyone wants to stay on further, we won't close the meeting room for a while. But Dr. Davidson, I know you provided the readings in advance. Do you have a sense now of what those readings would be next week, or did you want to hold off on that and we can email that to those who are registered for the class?
Yeah, I will do that. Let me just.
And I'll put it in the chat.
Good. So I'm seeing Kathleen's thing about the very last verse where he led Israel for 20 years. Yes, and the difference I would say to that, Kathleen, is that he was present as the leader, but he never really did it. So it's one thing to occupy the office, it's another thing to actually perform the task in service of the entire nation. So next week, we'll be looking at chapter 19. So you could read all of chapter 19 next week, for next week.
Great.
If
Well,
you
thank
wish,
you all.
you could go 17 and 18 if you wish to get some backstory, but 19 is enough. Thank you.
Thank you all. And again, I'll just keep it open for a few more minutes in case anyone wants to chat any further, but we'll see you next week. And thank you all for appearing and the great conversation, and especially thank you, Dr. Davidson, and everyone have a great week.
Yep.
Thank
okay.
you.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.